Welcome to Some Future Day. I'm Marc Beckman, and today we're diving deep into the future of artificial intelligence with a visionary entrepreneur who's taking on one of AI's most pressing challenges, bias and racism. John Pasmore, founder and CEO of Latimer, recognized early on that unchecked biases embedded in AI could profoundly affect future generations.
Now we had this new machine that everybody was looking at as being so intelligent, but it also had very obvious biases.
Inspired by the realization that his son and millions of others would interact with AI filled with implicit racial biases, John took decisive action to tackle these deep-rooted issues by providing training data that genuinely represents diverse perspectives.
It's how we would think that everyone would want to approach the world, and they want the most accurate view of the world as possible, and that's inclusive.
In today's conversation, we dive into why Latimer's unique approach, leveraging historical archives, textbooks, and dissertations from Black and other overlooked cultures, is essential for an equitable digital future. Stay with us as we discuss the implications of biased AI, the ongoing fight for accurate representation in technology, and how each of us can help shape a fairer, more inclusive future right here on Some Future Day. John Pasmore, it is such an honor to have you join me today on Some Future Day. How are you?
I am good. Kind of cloudy Monday morning here in New York City.
John, you are the founder and CEO of an AI platform, which is super compelling, Latimer. Obviously, the audience knows it today. What brought you into that space? What was the background, the impetus, the inspiration in building it? And this is, obviously a very difficult task and undertaking. So really, let's go backwards a little bit in time and share with the audience how you came up with the idea and what led you to where we are today.
I think you and I met some time ago. I was the CEO at that time of a startup called Voyage TV, which was an online, kind of like an Expedia with video. And I was considered a non-technical founder during those days. And I went back to Columbia to get a computer science degree, which took a bunch of years. So really the impetus is that armed with kind of a degree in the field. And at this point, looking at a teenager, when ChatGPT came out, I was looking at my son, and the idea that he would encounter not just the things that we worry about as parents, in terms of the society as a whole not being fair or encountering racism, but now we had this new machine that everybody was looking at as being so intelligent, but it also had very obvious biases. And I just thought, like, wow, if we drop the ball as adults and this next generation has to deal with not only all of the things that we've dealt with coming up, but now you would have, essentially racist AI. I think that just seemed way above and beyond what we should be leaving the next generation. So we thought that we could fix it. Basically, I thought some of the folks that were really, really critical of the bias that we were seeing on Twitter and X and everywhere else, were going to jump in and say, "Hey, I know that this is a problem, and here's my solution." But we didn't see any solutions. So, January 2024, we launched Latimer.
So, John, let's talk a little bit about the issue of racism as it relates to artificial intelligence and the training of LLMs. In my mind, John, I break it out in two ways. There's like the overt racism, but then there's also a part of it that is missing and will always be missing because society was racist during those time periods, right? Where, Black scholars or leaders within the Black community never had an opportunity in the 50s to submit very important documents and reports that might be considered, for example, for some sort of Nobel laureate prize or something along this line because of their race, because of racism. And as a result, these LLMs will always be implicitly biased. So I'm curious, from your perspective, what did you see? What were you seeing back then? And then what are your concerns today? And then what's the solve?
Mhm. I think the solve is kind of an ongoing process, but, I think when this generative AI first launched, we knew that it was using as training data, comments from, I think, like, Reddit and YouTube and other places where you know that you don't want generally your kids to spend a lot of time immersed in that. Social media is bad enough, but I think once you dive into the comments, you start seeing, very, polarized language. People don't hold back. You have that kind of veneer of being anonymous online so people can say anything. So when you use that as training data and, AI can't necessarily discern initially, hey, what's good or what's acceptable speech. I look at the LLMs. At first, they just needed a lot of words. I think we're up to now models with trillion parameter or trillion word, training sets. And then you try and make it as smart as possible. So you have, this machine that understands the language or has access to the language. And then you try and kind of give it some guidance, almost like a child, like, hey, what's acceptable? What do people expect you to say? What's offensive? And that's an ongoing process. We have a lot of conversation now about guardrails that have been built. So if you ask certain questions about certain topics, the AI itself knows, oh, this is a sensitive topic. I'm not, and sometimes it won't even answer. Some subjects it won't even delve into. If I want to create some sort of, mass casualty device. It knows, hey, I'm not going to give out the recipe for that. So people spend a lot of time trying to jailbreak the machines because they know that the data's in there. I think, what we did is we built what's called a RAG, meaning that we have our own data, which seems to kind of inform a foundation model. At this point, we have Latimer as a database, and we're sitting on top of OpenAI. We have two models from OpenAI, two models from Google's Gemini, two models from Anthropic, and then a self-hosted version of Llama that we're always be training to make better. But when those models have access to a database like Latimer that has things like the New York Amsterdam News from 1925 to present, dissertations, textbooks by Molefe Asante, storied kind of historians in the African American culture, and then you weight the model to say, hey. If you have a question and the answer is in this database, use that database as your preferred source, essentially, is what it's saying, or it mixes our database with what it can find in the foundation models. And now you have a whole other layer where the models can kind of go out and search the internet as well.
So you're doing very important work. How does the end user know about Latimer? Like, for example, it seems to me like creating a lens that is unbiased would be important for everyone, and everybody should be effectively putting that tool on top of OpenAI. They should all, everybody, including myself, we should all be using Latimer. So, how are you reaching that audience? I think
Well,
it's important to meet people like me, or like white people, right, should be looking through the Latimer lens rather than always going to ChatGPT or Perplexity or, Grok or DeepSeek or any of these other. Specifically talking now in terms of AI search, it seems like it's important for Latimer to reach a very wide audience.
yeah, it certainly is, and that's why we say on the homepage of Latimer it says AI for everyone, because we do think that it's how we would think that everyone would want to approach the world, and they want the most accurate view of the world as possible, and that's inclusive. You can't eliminate a culture from the data and then present that as, hey, this is a great view of the world. And certainly we're a young startup. We have a ton more to do. We want to do indigenous or Native American history and culture. We want to do more with Latinx. We want to do more, even with genders and sexual orientation. All of that, we feel you kind of need that view of the world because there's so many important contributions, not only scientific but just to the culture itself. What these differences make us as a group is different than being siloed in one culture. And again, we're just really still getting started. We were, we launched and we were, I would say, adopted, where we got a ton of inbound interest from higher ed initially, and we're still kind of working through that. We have some big universities and thousands of students that are using Latimer at this point. And again, we're
Right.
we're a young company, we're small, so we're taking their feedback and trying to build a better product. We just released this multi-model version last week, and we just have a new design that goes up this week. So we're building as fast as we
Congratulations.
can.
So multimodal meaning now it's more than just AI search. It's providing different capabilities, creating images, creating photographs, creating
Not,
video. Like what?
multi-model as opposed to multimodal.
Oh, okay.
Multi-model just means that, when we launched, we had Latimer plus, essentially 2 OpenAI models, and now we run the gamut where the user has a drop-down menu, and they can choose, which model. People at this point have preferences as to which model. We'll get into images, next, but again, with our focus on higher ed and in text generation as it relates to marketing in healthcare and other industries, I think we still have a lot of work to do on that side, and we still have a lot of work to do on the data acquisition side. We're talking to a university, one of the largest historically Black colleges and universities, that has 15 million unscanned pages, and that
Wow.
there's Frederick Douglass papers. There are papers
Wow.
even, from, like, David Dinkins, the former mayor of New York.
Yeah.
So nobody has that, and, those things create a blind spot for everyone because the models just feel like if it doesn't see it, it doesn't exist or didn't
Right.
happen in that detail. So we need to there's a lot of data. We have the Schomburg Museum uptown in New York City that's doing some work with Google, but their stuff isn't online. So a lot of things that are in universities, museums, big chunks of our culture that I think as humans we recognize or we're aware of. Again, if the model isn't trained on it, it's not aware of it. As if it didn't happen.
Yeah, that's really important work. That's where I see as we started the conversation, that's where I see one of, if not the biggest issue, it is certainly one of the biggest issues as it relates to racism, sexism, and bias. If you're going to drill a little deeper, do you feel like your job personally isn't just to stand up Latimer, but now you're really a champion for getting Black history correct as it relates to the future? Education is such a critical part as it relates to generative AI. It can really shape the way that your son's generation and your grandchildren's generation see the world. But without this type of information, it's just wrong. So do you feel on a personal level, John, that like you've transformed from like a business commercially oriented person into business slash Black activist in a way? Black tech activist?
Um, Occasionally,
Really
as well as
important.
I do, what you're trying to do, we're a for-profit business. So a lot of people ask that, are you a nonprofit? No, we're a for-profit business. So as a CEO, your first job necessarily is to build, a profitable business and ultimately return capital to your shareholders or partners. And how we're doing that is we're building this machine that we do think solves a critical issue in terms of the information that's available. It does mean, I think, that when I'm speaking on a campus or something like that, where you're speaking to young people, I think that's how they view it. Like, oh wow, this is really important for our future that we have this alternative, especially, now we're seeing in certain states where books are being banned or books are being taken out of the library. And it could be a book that we all know, like, To Kill a Mockingbird, or things that we thought, oh, we settled that conversation 80, 90 years ago where that would never happen in the United States. We're seeing kind of this throwback where there is this effort to kind of reframe history. And we just really want the facts. We're trying, what we put in Latimer are things like, dissertations, textbooks, newspapers. We're not trying to be another source for opinions. We're just trying to get as much of the factual record as possible from a bunch of different sources. The AI itself is smart enough, I think, at this point to discern what's mostly factual. We're still seeing some issues with AI in search. When AI just says, "Oh, I'm going to go out to the open internet to answer Mark's question," if we saw this before the election, if there are a ton of articles that are saying something, and it could be false, or it could be kind of an opinion about, let's say, a conflict or one of our relationships with another country. It's going to assume, oh, I've seen so many articles like this, that must be the truth, so to speak, and that's what it returns. So, all those I think are technical issues that we can get to, but with anything in history where we don't have video, right? We're going to have even different historians that sit on different sides of an issue or sit on
Yeah.
different sides of an event and look at it differently.
It's even worse than that, John. I've seen recently in the past 6 months, individuals who are not qualified as historians. They think they're historians and they go on major shows like Tucker Carlson, who, end up influencing people, even though he's not an expert on these types of topics. And they disseminate false and misleading misinformation about different subsets of society. So we have like so many issues as it relates to our children's generation and beyond. I want to ask you a question. Like when you go back into the jailbreak topic for a minute, and then you uncover this, corpus of information at a university, for example. You need to go back then, I imagine, or it would be ideal to go to the centralized entity like an Sam Altman's OpenAI or back over to Google and say like, hey, look, I just found this incredible corpus of information that's relevant for, Black individuals. And furthermore, that's important as it relates to getting the training for artificial intelligence done. Shouldn't we incorporate that back down below Latimer so that it's right for Google, it's right for OpenAI? Do you end up taking it down below Latimer's? Like to me, I see Latimer sitting on top of all of these different LLMs. So if I'm correct, do you take it down below also?
It depends. Very early on we had a conversation with one of the big models, well, with two actually, um, where they could take an API from Latimer, a call to Latimer to answer certain queries, and then in the case of these documents, now that we're looking at assisting some of these universities and other institutions, what we're building really is a licensing platform. So
Oh,
it's
cool.
not even, the money is really going back to the university. So in some senses, it allows them to generate recurring revenue from something that's just been essentially gathering dust, in some cases, literally in a basement. So we want to digitize it. We want to create a licensing platform that uses technology very similar to Latimer in that it's a RAG or retrieval augmented generation, meaning that the information never leaves the university's server. So you can have access Google, you can have access Anthropic, but you're not downloading or you're not owning the underlying intellectual property. And I think that also has been kind of a stumbling block as these giant companies have landed in their search for data. They've landed at these institutions, and when these institutions look at the actual agreements, they're like, well, this agreement does more than just gives you training data. And so they get in these fights, and in some cases they can't resolve them because intellectual property is something that a Google, let's say, has had a ton of experience with. They are definitely not a nonprofit, and they are, fairly aggressive from a legal standpoint. So I think some of the folks that we've talked to in the academic space, they appreciate when Google Education is doing positive things, but when you're talking, I think sometimes to Google Legal, it's a little bit more thorny in terms of those relationships. So that's the goal, is just to build a licensing platform.
But what about the ethical consideration? Like just sticking on Google for a minute, don't they have like an ethical obligation to ensure that the corpus of data and information that Gemini is trained on is appropriate so that our children and our grandchildren have a accurate perception of the world or as close to accurate as possible, John?
Yeah, you've been around for a while, and when I thought, in creating this, really since the '90s, is as far back as I can remember with these companies, we kind of know that there have been efforts, to get Meta to hire more diverse Black and Brown engineers. The number of engineers at these companies has been roughly, or their number of their diverse hiring has been roughly at 2%. So we saw that in the '90s. We saw that the following decade. We saw that the following decade. In my opinion, if you have a $1 billion entity and you have an internal problem that you wanted to solve, I'm going to universities all the time. There's a ton of Black and brown and women engineers. If that would be your goal, you could certainly bump that number up to 7 or 10%, whatever you really wanted to. So since I haven't seen that there's this effort, I'm not going to assume that the ethics around the inclusion of these models, especially with this administration, I'm not sure that that's like a burning issue. I don't know. I'm not. I know that what we do. I can't really speak for them.
Yeah, that's too bad because, to your point, if you're saying that going through Llama 2 with Zuckerberg, if you're saying that these guys aren't hard charging with regards to um, hiring with a core team of engineers in a diverse way, then what's the motivation from a moral perspective or an ethical perspective in getting the content right?
Yeah, and as just like with, if you have a diverse board, in terms of a board of directors, you do that because that diverse board, different issues are going to resonate differently, with a woman or with a Black person or
Of course.
a person from the Caribbean or Mexico, and you want that diversity of perspective generally in an organization. We're just at a funny time where that level of diversity is now being challenged in some ways, or it's very hazy at best in terms of how the administration is supporting that. We do have laws on the books about discrimination, but we've seen a rollback from some very large companies stepping away from their stated support for diversity in their organizations.
So, what would you suggest happens? Like, where do you see a pathway forward, a runway to ensure that what you're talking about actually occurs in America?
I mean, I think it kind of goes to the core of what America is, and I'm still confident that most of our country believes, and all men are created equal. These are the kind of the foundational things that uh, created America, and in my opinion, these are the things that make America great.
Great.
Is our diversity. I mean, we've gotten, everybody here is actually from somewhere else. It might have been 100 years ago, it might have been last year,
Sure.
but that's what has made us kind of super resilient. That's what, the best and brightest from around the world have always want to come here. So that's why, we have the best companies, because we have the pick of some of the smartest people on the planet.
Well, John, looking at the federal government, obviously we have a government that's set up of the executive branch, legislation, and the court system. So I'm curious, from your perspective, like the executive orders don't have teeth, in my opinion. I know they have impact early on, and they're having an impact here for sure. But ultimately, legislation is what is needed. So have you been linking into senators and Congress people as well? Like where does that stand?
Yeah.
Representative senators, like, how's Latimer doing on that front?
Yeah, again, we're a young company. We do, I think, punch above our weight in terms of, our reputation, and I think people understand what we stand for. We early on spent some time, with the staff at Chuck Schumer's office, with the Congressional Black Caucus. Generally speaking, federal government moves pretty slow. So that's where I guess President Trump has had an edge because he can just write an executive order and it's done. Or now you have a bunch of those that are being challenged in court, but he can kind of write those faster than Congress can kind of keep up with them. Number one, and I think we're in a period where you're seeing just less legislation or less desire to regulate industry, AI being, I think, at the top of that list, where we're just not going to see any real legislation. And I think recently they said not only are we not going to legislate, but the states cannot legislate AI around AI. So you had some states like California, Colorado, even New York, that were taking the lead because there was a vacuum in terms of what the federal government was or was not doing. So we just have this period. I guess you could call it unbridled capitalism, where it's just the free market, and it's a little bit rough and tumble. But again, I think I have faith in people, I have faith in the market, and I do think that there's a lot of energy. In terms of when I look at what's going on college campuses, there's a lot of political thought. There's a lot of energy with the younger generation. So we want to give them a tool that harnesses that energy. And, as we continue to build, maybe add some connectivity or community aspects. So like minded people can use these tools as teams, essentially.
So, what you're referencing is this legislation that I think we're going to see Congress like bulk, butting heads really soon now, with regards to this massive bill. They call it what, the big beautiful bill, I think is
Yeah.
what they're referencing to. And within it, I was kind of shocked to find this too, John. There's a section of the big beautiful bill which highlights that the AI industry itself will regulate. It will not allow for the states to regulate. And I think you're right. My interpretation is to allow for AI entrepreneurs like American ingenuity to unlock and create wealth. And I think that if that happens, that could be very expansive. It could spread across different business sectors, from the creative fields to finance, medicine, war games, etc. I'm curious from your perspective, if you take off your hat on the issue of racism for a second and just look at it. You said, like, obviously you're a commercially oriented business. So if just from looking at it from the entrepreneurial perspective, is that a good thing? Do we want the states to regulate? Or for a company like Latimer, which is in early growth, are you happy to see, just purely commercially speaking now, are you happy to see like hands off from the states?
The only reason I might be happy is that I don't think, that there's a lot of understanding of AI. So when you look at, some of the questions when you have a Sam Altman talking to the Congress or Senate, you can see that a lot of people really still don't understand AI. So having those people draft rules around how it should be implemented. We even see it at universities. Somebody just sent me Ohio State is allowing AI for all their students. Some colleges have a zero tolerance for AI still. I think that will quickly change, but I think that is a generational issue as well. That, some of these institutions are just led by folks that just see this as a way to enable student cheating, as opposed to student learning. And that is a danger. But I think that we as an industry can continue to innovate, create products that address those issues, and that if people are, and I have faith in the American public, I do think that they want fair and accurate information. Although, we see, that craziness of opinions and news. But I think when we go to the internet, when we're searching in one of the search engines, or we go to one of these AI platforms, I don't think it's for additional opinions. I think people want to drill down and get to some sort of factual basis.
John, it's interesting on the educational front. It really hits home with me. As you are aware, I am a professor. I've been a professor at NYU for 7 years. And over the past 2 years, I've seen my students leveraging artificial intelligence in the classroom in real time. Even when we're doing quizzes or tests, like full on exams, they'll leverage it. And I don't believe that there's an artificial intelligence that has been built yet really to perfectly detect when AI is built, but because I'm so deep into it, I could see in knowing the individual and seeing what's on the page, I could see where AI was used. But it makes me think about this another area, like we're talking about, let's say, inequities within society, and I think this could become a new type of inequity in society, John, where whereby on the one hand we have access to information, so we're democratizing intelligence and knowledge, which could be phenomenal. Everybody has, a phone and they're able to access that information. But on the other side, you have maybe our generation, which likes to learn, will do the homework and expand us as humans, versus the younger generation. And I know I'm generalizing right now, but it seems like a lot of the younger generation might like to use the tool because they're a little lazy and they just want a good grade. And I guess, do you see some sort of an imbalance, notwithstanding the tremendous access to knowledge, data, and information? Do you see some sort of an imbalance coming between the knowledge haves and the knowledge have-nots on a human level, on an individual level,
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
of AI?
That's a very, kinda core question about how we learn and, maybe the fact that I think we've already seen it where you don't remember something because you know that you can Google it so quick, so your mind already says, "I'm not gonna remember that, it's at my fingertips," and then you have efforts like what, Neuralink with, Elon Musk that basically wants to connect you directly connect your brain directly to a computer. In some senses, we've never been at this point, anything like it, where we have a machine that has read the entire internet and can recall it, and talk to you about it as if it's a person. Um, that person or that entity, whatever you want to call it, for young people is going to be, as long as there's electricity, right? They're going to be a companion for young people. Young people. My son will ask AI, "Hey, how do I tell a friend this uncomfortable thing?" And it'll give him advice about that. So, um, I just see that it's going to, we're in the steep curve of evolution in terms of the product. We don't know where it's going, actually. We don't know how it's going to. We know that there's some cognitive kind of knocks against the technology because you know, it solves stuff for you. But maybe there's more that you can do because you don't have to get involved in the mundane, so to speak. You see that in code creation right now. We don't know. And even, last year, I think everybody's saying, well, in 5 years, MIT is going to be very different. I think now we're saying, oh, in 3 years or 2 years, it's going to be very different because you have a machine that can essentially write code and tell you everything that you need to do. You just have to keep talking to it about what it is you're trying to do, and it'll give you the code necessary to do it. So that's an interesting phenomenon. The next phenomenon right after that is I could tell the machine this is what I want to do, and then maybe I don't even have to tell it anything more. It can iterate itself, and do, what we say is the machine doesn't, or AI doesn't have agency, now, but it could. I mean, you can program it in where it can do what it wants to do. So you could say, "Hey, ChatGPT, improve yourself. Write the code and store it, wherever you have to store it to make yourself even smarter." And do that recursively, just endlessly. Maybe test it, different things you could do, but it really doesn't, at some point, it's not gonna need engineers to tell it how to improve itself because even as an engineer, you haven't read, you know, I don't know, a billion lines of code and remember it. You know how to put things together, you know how to solve certain tasks, but you haven't read, you know, the entire code base, let's say, that's available on the internet.
So the picture that you're painting is really, to me, very encouraging because what you're talking about now is moving the language of coding away from effectively science to plain English. And when you do that, you're opening up a lens for entrepreneurial creative types to create digital platforms that perhaps all of these coders have never thought of before. I'm curious. So, what happens in your mind to the next generation when English becomes the common coding language?
Yeah, I mean, we're just at the precipice of that and seeing it. I'm excited to see what people come up with. You know, when we do our events on college campuses, we take Latimer to college campuses. We bring an artist with us, Delphine Diallo from Brooklyn, and Delphine thinks like, "Hey, I use AI all the time because it allows me to do things that I could only have imagined before, either an animation or some creation that would have taken a year now takes a week or some hours. So now she can create things that she'd never been able to create before. um, and I think we'll see that in a lot of different realms. Again, we don't know where that lands, but we do see that the people that are adopting and engaging with AI are starting to, have, if it, in commercial sense, they can be more productive, in a personal sense, an artistic sense, more creative. There certainly is, a downside to all this, as with everything. And we're not, we didn't evolve as human beings with tools like this. Essentially, you have, uh, it's like you have Einstein or whatever, however you want to frame it, as somebody that you can speak to at any time, about anything, about any topic. I think that folks that want to learn, it's maybe a different kind of learning. Where we. Growing up, there was a lot of memorization. You had to memorize this stuff, U.S. history. Then you had to come in on Friday for the test and regurgitate what you just memorized, and then you forget that the following week because you had on to the next decade or time period. So maybe that's not the most effective way. It leaves an impression about history, but do what happened in 1863 in the United States? Most people don't know.
Right. Unfortunately, we're living also in a time period where I think people are happy to forget the past, to forget human error, issues going back to the impetus behind Latimer, issues like racism and bias and sexism, anti-Semitism. It's like we just keep, as humans, just keep making the same mistakes over and over again. We're happy to do it. It's interesting though. You mentioned Elon's Neuralink. He's already embedded some of those chips. I've seen video myself. I imagine you did too, with regards to helping a couple of people with regaining their ability to, quote unquote, speak. But let's take that concept into the boardroom from a business perspective. Would someone like you embed a Neuralink in your brain so that you could have access to more data and an edge with regards to not just the people in the boardroom with you, but over your competition?
I wouldn't 100% rule it out. I would say that it's highly unlikely at this point. But, I think Elon had said, well, you'll be competing with somebody that does. So then how are you going to compete if the person next to you has, instant, at the speed of thought, they can access the entire internet and converse with it?
Right.
Yeah, that would be very difficult. I think, I saw another interesting iteration of that in the board. What happened if you had kind of a digital person on your board who, you know, is in some ways more insightful? It can read all of your board minutes from your very first board meeting to current. And, as you know, when you have new board members, getting them up to speed takes some time. So you have a machine that can read all your board minutes. It can read all your marketing materials. It can read everything about your company that you want to give it to, and then sit on the board. It can not only do that, but it can look around the board. It can understand what Mark's background is, everything that you've said and done, and actually create a persona and understand that, hey, if I say this, Mark's probably going to think this. He may not say it, but he's going to think this, and kind of work its way around the boardroom and understand who's sitting at the table with a degree of fluency that we currently don't have. So I met with a startup that's essentially working on that,
Wow.
and that would certainly change board dynamics to have that person, entity, whatever you want to call it, at the table.
For sure. That's a tremendous amount of influence with that knowledge base. When you reference the artist Delphine going with you to different campuses, it got me thinking to a topic that I often talk about. I talk about the age of imagination, which is fueled by AI and creating industries, specifically fashion, art, music, entertainment, Hollywood industries that can be disrupted now. So when you go on campus with Delphine, you have Delphine, the living, breathing, amazing artist, super talented individual who's been, finessing her craft for a lifetime. But then you have these kids on the college campus who are dreaming of becoming the next film director, right? The next Spike Lee, the next great author, the next great fine artist, and they're going to leverage artificial intelligence in ways that you and I probably have not yet dreamed of. They'll have the ability to disrupt Hollywood's big budget films, right? When Spike Lee steps in, he's got the backing of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars, in fact, in some cases, with thousands of staffers to help with regards to character development, writing, creation of music. I mean, it goes on and on and on. But now the dreamer, that young woman on a college campus that you're standing in front of with Delphine could say, wow, I could unlock AI and go after that Hollywood studio. I can now create my own film in a way that is way more efficient, not just from a cost perspective, but from a timing perspective as well. I could distribute across other types of emerging technology like social media for promotional purposes. I can be paid even digitally with cryptocurrency. I mean, we're going to see a radical transformation in society during this age of imagination. What do you predict will happen to, let's stay focused on Hollywood for a minute. Like, what do you think will happen to the types of content we're going to see, the way people consume content? Are we only going to be in theaters or streaming? Will we see something that's more 3D as we walk across the streets? What's happening? What's on the horizon on that front?
Well, I think
Because of AI, John, obviously.
yeah, Google just updated their, Runway, I think, was the first platform that really kind of come out and impress people what they could do with video. And then even then, you kind of realized, oh well, it can do, I don't know what it was, 15 or 20 seconds at a clip. But you can see, you can say, well, now you just extend that. You can see that, wow, this is going to be very disruptive. And I think, Tyler Perry, when Runway came out, he stopped development. He was building a huge $1 billion studio in Georgia, and he said, "Well, let's just hit the pause button here. There's something going on that's going to radically transform the landscape." We have, what seems like an insatiable demand when you look at, Netflix and Amazon and all these other streaming platforms for streaming content. It used to be, a couple movies a month came out. Now, we demand so much more. So I think that AI is definitely going to fill that void. We do have, more creative talents, I think, that can play in that sandbox because there's no barrier or very small barrier to entry. The first paper that really transformed generative AI was something called "Attention is all you need," and I think that applies to humans as well. Is if you're paying attention and you're using these tools, that's really all you need, because then, and your imagination, and you're unlocking opportunities that maybe people just dreamed of or nobody dreamed of it, but it's a huge opportunity for you.
John, our conversation is making me think about the concept of fame right now,
Yeah.
because I think like when you and I were younger, an individual was famous for their accomplishments and their achievements, and then people would see them in the flesh. We would press the flesh. Now this next generation, fame becomes something that's a little bit different, even for people in our generation that are quote unquote famous. People are famous when they have clicks or views. People are famous when they don't press the flesh. You don't get to see these individuals anymore. I was just speaking with a high prominent individual, and I was criticizing her because it seems like she's using social justice platforms for fame. She's using her name and her likeness, but not giving her own money to the platform
Wow.
and appearing as if she's trading off of her fame to be philanthropic, but she's not real. In my opinion, this is like a heated debate we had. I said, you're not really all in if you're not contributing your own money. So I'm curious from your perspective, what's going to happen? Could AI shift the perception or the concept of fame for the next generation too?
Yeah, I think we saw that, right, with YouTube creators and then influencers, and now you have, digital you have influencers that are really, just synthetic, right? They're not even real people. So I think that we're at the tip of that, iceberg. I really see that it's gonna take us some time to, once these avatars are truly fluent, it's going to take us some time to figure out really what makes us so different because they're appearing to have feelings, they're appearing to be sensitive and well spoken and generally very attractive physically. I think AI kind of understands at this point. It can just measure by engagement, right? What did people find attractive or influential? What do we spend time with? That's going to be a whole learning curve that we haven't had to deal with in the past where, you might be competing with a synthetic person for some role or for for people's attention.
For sure, but you were talking before about like the agentic part of artificial intelligence, which I think is really interesting. And you could take that a little further now into the concept of like metahumans, where we can basically throw out the whole segmentation approach, the traditional segmentation approach, where we look at age, gender, household income, geography across the nation. And I think we could get into these micro segments and bring up metahumans to appeal to these micro segments in a way that she or he may prefer. So, for example, if you're a 26-year-old who is, really, let's say, into the LGBTQIA plus community, and you don't want to go to Bank of America and interact with a guy that looks like me, you can have a metahuman that's photorealistic and speaking effectively in the same type of language that you and your peers would speak, and totally disrupt because of AI the way that interactions are in a good way with regards to a synthetic being as well as a human being.
Yeah. So, you're starting to see, right? The future is this, it's just hard to figure out. I think, what we saw with Chat GBT, which still amazes me, right? You had companies like Google or even Meta that were working on these technologies forever, since their inception. But Chat GBT kind of got first mover advantage and then they just never really gave it up. They never let up. So here you have, Google being the leader, so to speak, is a multi-billion dollar company that's essentially being disrupted, right? In the same way we've lived through a couple of disruptions, Napster in the music industry,
Yeah.
Netflix in the film industry. So now you have ChatGPT and maybe the whole software industry because you do have software companies that are maybe trying to embrace AI. Certainly, Microsoft has made a big bet, but
Yep.
they can be disrupted as well because now you as a young person could figure out, you know what, really I want a male client that does X, Y, and Z. I'm not a coder. I know how I want to look. I know how I want it to be, and you can create that yourself.
John, so let's break it down a little bit for the audience. Which one of these major tech companies do you think is doing it the best when it relates to combating racism?
Oh, I think they're I think they're kind of all neck and neck. I think Anthropic talks about it, more, or talks about fairness and equity more, and I think even just talking about it, moves your brand around a little bit where people are expecting that you're kind of this kinder, gentler, more progressive, company, and so I think that they would be kind of the leader. You have stalwarts like, Microsoft or Amazon that don't seem super sensitive to the topic, don't talk about it a lot. So, I think eventually that young people or people that care about these issues will vote with their attention, essentially.
So during our conversation, you've landed on a couple of elements of an ecosystem where racism could permeate through and impact AI training as well as the content that the individual taking in the AI either views or understands. Right? You've spoke about academia. You spoke about major corporations. You've discussed government. Which other part of the ecosystem, in your opinion, needs to be impacted in a positive way to further combat racism in AI?
I mean, the two industries I think that are can be most impactful or have negative consequences if they don't are healthcare and law enforcement. So in healthcare, we already see that there's very wide disparities that are sometimes hard to discern as to what the reason is for this. You have black women mortality, um, you know, um, maternal mortality that is equivalent in some states, in the United States, equivalent to third world countries. So a woman going in to have a child in a hospital in Oklahoma has a very high risk of having a bad outcome, and there's really not a good reason for that. There's not a good technical reason for that. I'm partners with Spike Lee's wife, Tanya Lewisly, in another business, and she has a documentary about that. So, aftershock. So I think that that's a huge issue. Whether or not healthcare companies really want to open up that can of worms, you do have something now called, it's generally passive listening, so that you have a listening device. So the AI is maybe listening to how a doctor or a nurse is interacting with a patient, and the AI can kind of flag language, or it can say, "Hey, this patient expressed that they were in pain 6 hours ago. I see no remediation. There's been nobody here to drop off any kind of pain medicine. So, whereas maybe that would have just been forever overlooked, it can be flagged, it can be examined by the institution as to,
That's
well,
great.
why did this happen? And then law enforcement is, as you can see, just a can of worms. I think we're in a crazy scenario where you
Wild.
have law enforcement and really you're seeing what people have been talking about with privacy all this time, because you see in our immigration efforts, just really, really egregious violations of people's privacy, whether that's, hey, you're traveling, you come back to the United States, and they're checking your phone and your messages for your statements and detaining people against that. That's not something that we would expect. So, law enforcement, and privacy, right? So, it may be that for some time your protection of your privacy is really up to you as because the law hasn't caught up to it, or the law is not abiding by the law, which is unfortunate.
John, it seems like you have such a Herculean effort in front of you. Curious from your perspective, do you have other colleagues or institutions that are supporting you with these efforts that you would like to take a minute to talk to and highlight so that the audience can do a little research and see beyond Latimer who else is fighting this fight with you?
Well, we have support. We have support both from institutions. I mean, the colleges themselves have been, Southern New Hampshire University was our big first client. They have 170,000 students. Big supporter for diversity. Big supporter for visibly showing. They have over 30,000 Black and Brown students. They want to visibly show hey, we care about you as a part of our college community. So I think that's we want more of that. HBCUs themselves have been tremendously supportive. The very first school, Miles College, a little college in Alabama, was the very first to adopt Latimer. The United Negro College Fund, the UNCF, has been tremendously supportive. The billionaire Robert Smith has an organization called Student Freedom Initiative that's been very supportive. Black Girls Code, we have a partnership, so we get a tremendous amount of inbound interest, and
Great.
so there's really just almost too many organizations to name that are aligned. So we're excited about that and love the support.
That's great, John. So, John, you've given me a ton of time, but I want to make sure before we end this conversation that we covered. We've gone really broad here, but are there any specific topics or issues that are on your mind that you think the audience should be aware of as it relates to racism and bias in AI?
I think we did cover everything. We've had a broad conversation. I do think that it's up to people to vote with their attention. In terms of what do you want the future to look like. We have an attention economy where everything on the internet really is we do have some subscription fees, but we're always looking for your time essentially. And if you invest your time with AI, I think that there's a ton of possibilities to improve yourself, to improve your education, to for your family. We recently read that African American mothers are over-indexing on their use of AI because they
Oh,
see it
cool.
as a way to kind of leapfrog some of the issues around tutoring or access to tutoring for their kids. So we hope to
Great.
see more of that.
That's great. So, John, every guest that comes onto my show on some future day ends the show with me in the same format. I provide the guest with a lead question that incorporates the show's name and allow for my guest to finish it. Are you game?
All right, let's give it a whirl.
We're gonna let you go, John. This is it. You gotta finish this last task, and then we're gonna let you go. So, in some future day, artificial intelligence will not be biased or racist if.
If we pay attention, we will have, I don't know, the companion that we've always dreamed about.
John Pasmore, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Some Future Day. It's really great to see you.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate the time.
Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Some Future Day. I know your time is super valuable, so I hope you learned how you can leverage emerging technology to improve your life. And exciting news, my new book, Some Future Day, How AI is Going to Change Everything, is now available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, and other major booksellers across the globe. I am so proud to share that because of your support, the book topped the charts. It became #1 bestseller in cryptocurrency, #1 bestseller in artificial intelligence, and #1 bestseller in robotics. So, if you're curious and ready to learn how AI can enhance your career, your community, and your family, get yourself a copy today.